You know, I sometimes think that Thanksgiving is nothing but a Rorschach test. This huge ink blot from which we describe our impressions and interpretations. It seems everyone has his or her own ideas about the kind of food that was actually served at first Thanksgiving. There are infinite interpretations about the true relationship between pilgrims and the Indians. Historians are at odds about the number of days the celebration lasted, the reason for the dinner, the actual date of the dinner, and what it was they were celebrating. People argue over whether or not pilgrims wore hats with buckles and if the Indians wore anything at all. I think many Americans actually believe that football was invented that very first Thanksgiving, and maybe, who knows, some form of it has. Sentiment and nostalgia cloud the picture of our nation's harvest celebration. And now even politics have stretched the pilgrim's story to satisfy self-serving purposes. The very meaning of Thanksgiving has been given a new spin by our beloved Tea Party, which always prides itself on historical revisionism. So forget about celebrating the bountiful harvest or expressions of gratitude to the Indians who helped the pilgrims through that first harsh winter. In the Tea Party view of the holiday, the first settlers were actually early socialists. They realized the error of their collectivist ways and embraced capitalism, producing a bumper year upon which they decided that it was only right to celebrate the glory of the free market and private property. It's all there in Rush Limbaugh's book, Dead White Guys or What Your History Books Never Told You. In that, we learn that history has completely and deliberately misguided our understanding of the pilgrims. So here's what actually happened. Pilgrims came to Plymouth in order to establish a communal system where all had to pool whatever they hunted or grew on their land. Because they could not reap the fruits of their labors, no one had any incentive to work, and the system failed. Finally, the governor of the colony, William Bradford, abolished the system and gave each household a parcel of land. With private property to suddenly call their own, pilgrims became industrious workers and found themselves with more corn than they knew what to do with, so they invited the Indians over. The moral of that Thanksgiving story is that socialism doesn't work. The odd thing is that the right-wing version isn't that far off the mark, but the truth can only be stretched to a certain point before it snaps in your face. Historians from the Plymouth Plantation Museum maintain that the Pilgrims did, in fact, agree to hold their property in common, what William Bradford referred to as the common course. The arrangement did not produce famine, but Bradford did get rid of the common course in 1623, not because the system wasn't working, but because pilgrims didn't like it. The real history of the Pilgrims is that they broke up their communes because the bachelors didn't want to feed the wives of married men, and the women didn't want to do the laundry of the bachelors. I think that's the same reason why every commune has failed, from Plymouth Rock to Brook Farm to those hippie communes in the 70s. It all boils down to this disdain about washing other people's underwear. And that's what gave rise to capitalism. It's amazing. The essential message folded in the nooks and crannies of Thanksgiving's meaning. The message is rapidly unraveling in our world today. Thanksgiving is not about the evils of socialism, but instead underscores the need to express sincere gratitude, our gratitude for abundance, and to learn the implications of having more than one actually needs to live a simple life. Failure by the super committee to reduce our nation's debt, indeed the impasse paralyzing our entire Congress, mirrors the conflict of either piling up more and more even when the larder is full, or sharing the abundance more equitably. The argument justifying the unlevel playing field rests on the premise that those who have worked really hard for it, and those who don't have failed somehow because they lack a proper work ethic. By shirking responsibility towards those less fortunate because they seem to lack the determination to make the grade, we justify an individual's right to limitless excess. In fact, we really preach the survival of the fittest. Nonetheless, social scientists make efforts to show that regardless of what our opinions about the merits of sharing may be, regardless of what we think, the hard truth remains that generosity is grounded in gratitude. That's the key finding. Generosity is grounded in gratitude. Without feeling grateful for receiving the blessings of a rich life, there is no next step towards an open-heartedness for how we treat our neighbors. And there's also a correlation between a lack of gratitude and the feeling that one has gained or accomplished or emerged on top through the sweat of one's own brow alone. You know, it's sort of like, I didn't need any help to make it, so what are you asking for? All you need to do is kind of tough it out. I did it on my own. So there lies a vast difference between gratitude for one's good fortunes, which means feeling blessed, humbled by how well things have in fact worked out. Separate that from the sense of having completely earned one's good life by oneself. I mean, contrast the two in these words. This I deserve. I feel so blessed. What a contrast in attitudes and views and sentiments. These contrary attitudes define our relationship really to others. How are we going to go about treating others? How we go about relating to the world. Now, we have a fine example here in Utah in John Huntsman Sr. His generosity in building one of the finest cancer research hospitals in the world is essentially grounded in his gratitude for the blessings that helped him through his own personal fight against cancer. Yes, Huntsman accumulated a great wealth, but his success is measured by the good results that stem from having shared his bounty. Huntsman personifies the concept doing good after having done well. You ever hear that phrase? I think it's a real interesting idea. Doing good after having done well. Rockefeller's another example of demonstrating that riches were merely a means to perform that which is morally good. However, it becomes blatantly obvious that our society today still tilts towards the gospel of greed. The flow of generosity has been reduced to a trickle, and the feeling of gratitude is in short supply. We live with this prevailing sense that what we have accumulated, we have earned for ourselves, and there are no obligations, there are no strings attached. We earned it. Sam Keen, in his book Hymns to an Unknown God, describes gratitude as something that cracks the hard shell of your ego. Cracks that shell which you need to possess and control, and transforms you into a generous being. That's what gratitude does. It transforms you into a generous being. The sense of gratitude produces true spiritual alchemy, makes us magnanimous and large of soul. So keep this spiritual alchemy in the back of your mind as we slightly shift gears.